Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an SP Reviews, where today we have ourselves a track from an act named Vague Pains off of their album Fragile Rush, titled Feathering Out. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on Bandcamp. We've got the art here for Vague Pains. We're going to be listening through this track from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go. Really pretty combination of synths, guitars, and cymbals. Fascinating panning position with that at home. Scintillating elements there with the guitars, the reverb tails, and everything like that. Loving the synth focus and the interesting time signatures. It's nice to just have a bit of a pause here, you know, with the intensity of everything else so far. And a reiteration back to that thing. I mean, I think what I love equally with the percussion is the focus on the toms and that side of the kit versus the more sort of traditional kick, snare, hi-hat focuses. It's nice to have those different bits from per section. It's also, you know, we'll talk about it more in the conclusion, but there's a lot to appreciate here. I just want to have a quick look through the lyrics first, and then we'll move forward. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from an act named Vague Pains off of their album Fragile Rush, titled Feathering Out. Now, what do I think this track is about? I think this track is about someone observing another, feathering out, gradually vanishing as I understand it. In the sun to feel everything you knew, as if to say that we were slow disappearing, and where they were almost happy about it. They were drifting, and free, as if by feathering out, they were getting to a point where they were almost above everything else in the world. and as per defiance in a poultry world, but you can keep everyone near because of your ardor or your enthusiasm and everything like that. I think the other person, the one telling the story, is wondering whether they're drifting away too, whether they're feathering out. I'm not quite sure what the let metal sing it was only echoing part is. I'm not actually sure if I've got the meaning of the track, to be honest, but I think that's it. I think it's maybe a comment on someone else, their ascension into another form or something like that, and wondering if it's going to happen to them too. The vocal performance was kind of wispy, and it was an interesting tone there. It kind of shimmered in the mix and it wasn't super pokey or anything like that. It was meant to, I think, kind of be a part of the ether, the various bits in the mix, less as a dominant part of it, but more or less I kind of like to almost say that they're feathering out within the track themselves. There were some interesting vocal melodies in there. I don't think the vocals were necessarily main focus of the track though. We did want to tell a story, but it was almost like the various sort of guitar parts or synth solos or any of the other sort of light tones we had going on were equally as important, and I kind of enjoy that. I think that's a really sweet thing because it shows that the person who wrote and performed this not only can write music well, but they also understand that music can be more than simply a platform to tell a tale. You can almost get the rest of the elements to do the heavy lifting for you. I think that when the vocals were there, they were reasonably present despite how kind of washed they were, and ultimately it was satisfying, very peaceful to listen to. The track itself at 3 minutes 30 works well for the length of a single, being between that 2 to 4 minute mark, that sweet spot there. I was really happy with it. I think that it was well structured. We had various verses and choruses as well as an interlude section, and the guitars, the synths, the bass, the drums, etc. worked really nicely together. I liked the fact that with the percussion, we had more of a tone focus occasionally working between some 8th and 16th note grooves, and when the hi-hats or cymbals did come in, even though they were quite subtle at the beginning with just those occasional hi-hats on the offbeat or something like that, they came up and there was a great sort of extra bit of force and oomph behind it when we did have the kick and snare focus. There were some nice fills in there which did transfer elegantly between sections. The bass line in there was very subtle, but I think it worked in this situation because it harmonized nicely with the root notes and the chord progressions. And I don't think that the low end was as much of a focus in this track. It might be different on like bigger speakers as opposed to these headphones where there's not a huge amount of sub bass. But I nonetheless appreciated the fact that the focus was more in the mid to high range to show how pretty the guitars and synths were. Guitars were fascinating. There was a really nice bright cherry distortion to them, but at the same time the riffs that they were playing were some unusual cut melodies and movements between like sort of more kind of progressive forward thinking rhythm parts and cascading elements there. We also had some really nice shimmery clean guitars with like choruses and such, which matched well tonally in regards to texture with the synth elements we had. I think if the guitars had been too raw in this one, it would have sounded a little bit like it was sticking out of the mud. So I'm glad that we had that sort of mystical, magical kind of layer across those parts in the mid-range. There was a relative minimalism to the lead playing. I don't think we were trying to take too much attention away from the vocals, despite the vocals being relatively minimalistic as well. And it's more like a very kind of low-key track, which occasionally has quite a lot of energy, but it's more something you can kind of like vibe with and appreciate. I think part of that was the amount of fun we had choosing these different synth tones and textures. We had really pretty pads with interesting envelopes that kind of opened up like flowers, and other pokey ones and little sort of string bits, and there was all sorts of concepts there, and they each had their own signature tone. Some were in different areas of the frequency spectrum, and some were different areas of the stereo field. And what I liked is that they managed to coalesce together and find a way to connect without any of them kind of being too abrupt or rough. There was dynamic range to this track. Things weren't the same loudness all the time, and what I also appreciate is that when we did go down, we didn't necessarily have too much space, simply because there was a lot. Even with things being more intense and full in energy, such as in the hook parts, there wasn't a sense of urgency with it. So even if we had the 8th or 16th note kicks, it was more like a way to continue a pace with a different kind of scent of it other than quarters or whole notes. I should note that I think that it was a very organic way of approaching the time signatures and rhythmic phrasings or bar sizes in this track, we had unpredictable amounts of beats per bit, and we didn't loop those necessarily unless we were being deliberate with the way we wanted to phrase things in regards to our choruses and verses. And I think that it kind of illustrates a freedom and independence in the way we're writing this, but also just the fact that we're aware that if it's 4/4 the entire time, it can almost sound a little bit phoned in if you don't add enough spice in there. Ultimately, the theme sounds like it's not really sure how to feel about the situation. Some of the really kind of like charismatic lead lines on the guitars and some of the really friendly sounding ideas on the synths kind of let us know that there might be a sense of glory and admiration in the way that the person is feathering out, but at the same time there is an underlying sense of frustration potentially with how those floor toms and move forward with how we are feeling in our own space, as if we're kind of looking at the contrast between their journey drifting at peace and kind of making a statement on how it's kind of the world is just too small and kind of weak for that, as in like we're soaring above it because it's like it's like an act of defiance against the fact that we have those limits and we don't want to follow them anymore. That's just me trying to sort of put two and two together though, and kind of piece together the way the theme sounds with the vocals and the performance and the lyrics. Ultimately, I'm satisfied with how it comes together. It's one of the more unusual tracks I reviewed recently, but I enjoy the way it sounds, and if you enjoyed it, please do go check out the Fragile Rush album. But looking at the studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering, I think this was done well. I think the vocals, even though they're not super present in the mix, I don't think they were necessarily intended to be stylistically, and that's fine. There was dynamic range between various elements of the mix. Sometimes the guitars and bits came in a whole lot louder, such as in the hook sections, but things kind of simmered down occasionally as well. And I like that we weren't trying to make the mix too consistently kind of like intense there, because if you have the same loudness the entire time, it just becomes a little bit boring. You kind of dull your ears to it a little bit. It was nice and wide in the stereo field, it was nice to be surrounded by those guitars and all the various other sort of mid-range melodic and harmonic layers. And it was also nice and full in the frequency spectrum, even though there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't absolutely stuffed with things happening all the time and a lot of freneticism with the notes and everything like that. It still sounded full and chunky with everything being notched where it needed to be. Finally, it was nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression and limiting was handled well. And I mean, effectively, this is my review of this track from an act named Vague Pains from their album Fragile Rush titled Feathering Out, and hopefully enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and their Bandcamp page, and stay cool and stay safe. Please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as either help more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world, and I will catch you in the next review. Spiderhands Out.